Greetings, greetings, greetings. Halito, hiya, and welcome. Welcome to my channel, Califia X, here to add my part in the upliftment and edification of all autonomous Aborigines of Americas at home and abroad. Currently lost at sea, it would seem, a sea of media and propaganda. So, first of all, before we jump into the National Geographic article, where we see some blatant NLP tactics being used, I'd really like to say thank you very much to my subscribers. Thanks for spending the time with me in what I call the labyrinth rabbit hole of lies. Now, if you were with me for the article review of lying on Psychology Today, then I would have made mention of Justin Smollett, who was actually just all over the news for quite some time, for quite a few days, and I did mention that that was a form of social engineering that was actually happening in real time. Now, here we can see today, just a few days later, absolutely nothing about him on the front cover of a popular news reporting site. But we do see some interesting articles here. It would be quite interesting to see if anything interesting comes out of this, and if me too, in some kind of a way, get involved with this, in view of the fact that we are actually talking about lying. This is the National Geographic website with the article Why We Lie, the science behind our deceptive ways. Honesty may be the best policy, but scheming and dishonesty are part of what makes us human. And as mentioned in the introduction, here we have the picture of the polygraph, which is from the Smithsonian. And again, as I said, I hope this is some sort of irony, because we have an article about lying with a picture of the polygraph machine, which is supposed to detect lying, but in fact is itself a scientific lie. Jeffrey Bunn, PhD, who's a psychologist and a polygraph historian, who in the previous article from Psychology Today, there was quite an interesting section with quotes from him actually talking about the fact that it is only there for entertainment value. We also saw in that article, and here we have the 2017 version of it, another PhD actually suggesting that lying to yourself and being delusional was part, in fact essential, to good mental health. There were some examples in there where they talked about Death of a Salesman and The Iceman Cometh as tragic heroes who were self-delusional, whose lives fell apart, obviously, once everybody realised their self-delusion, including them. So this is Patrick Cowenberg, who was a judge in Los Angeles County Superior Court, who actually told fantastic stories about himself and even invented an illness to explain it. So he apparently got the Purple Heart in Vietnam. He was responsible for all sorts of covert operations with the CIA, and he had a fantastic educational background. He had an undergraduate degree in physics and of course a master's degree in what? Psychology. Of course none of it was true, but his illness that he or his lawyer, which we saw in the Psychology Today article, make their living from lying, called pseudologia fantastica, which is a tendency to tell stories containing facts interwoven with fantasy. It didn't actually save him, though. He was actually removed from the bench, which is what normally happens when people who are delusional or tell those kind of fantastic lies, when they get caught, they're knocked from their pedestal very quickly. So before we actually go into the research that's been discovered, the results from the research, on the brain, I just want to go into this little section here that I mentioned earlier about when you believe in a theory and don't question the theory, don't question the information that's been given to you. This is the type of thing that happens. And here we go. That human beings should universally possess a talent for deceiving one another shouldn't surprise us. Researchers speculate that lying as a behavior arose not long after the emergence of language. The ability to manipulate others without using physical force likely conferred an advantage in the competition for resources and mates, akin to the evolution of deceptive strategies in the animal kingdom such as camouflage. Lying is so easy compared to other ways of gaining power, notes Cicella Bock, an ethicist at Harvard University who is one of the most prominent thinkers on the subject. It's much easier to lie in order to get somebody's money or wealth than to hit them over the head or rob a bank. So I'm actually going to deal with why I think, and I can't stop laughing no matter how many times I do this section, why I think that this paragraph here is hokum, to be polite. Now, he goes on to say that we started to lie not long after the emergence of language, and I do want you to note that that word there, speculate, means that they really don't know. They don't know. All of the research I have done into language would actually state quite the opposite. Because when you actually look at how languages start out, okay, we take language for granted because we've been talking since mummy, daddy and family members started talking to us. So it's quite difficult to really think about how complicated a form of communication language actually is. It's actually quite amazing when you start thinking about the complexity and the formation of words. You know, that they're actually just made out of sounds at the end of the day. Those sounds build up words that make up sentences that can actually express all manner of information, from how we feel to actually warning somebody that there's danger, this is nice to eat, whatever. Okay. To show you what a controversial subject this is, in 1866 the French Academy actually banned all discussion and papers on the origin of language, because obviously there was all kinds of weird suppositions coming up because of this out of Africa theory. And how did an ape manage to develop the brain function as well as all the vocal functions that would be necessary to actually speak a language? Because when you actually look at animals, they have distinct calls. So they'll have calls, say, for food, danger, threat, some kind of reconciliation. All attempts to teach apes to actually speak a language have results are fairly rudimentary at the end of the day. When you look at, say, tribes of hunter-gatherers, they have a comprehensive language. Their language skills allows them to converse on many different subjects under the sun, and even the click languages that you see with the older ancestral tribes speaking those languages, they're still complex in their form. Sign language as well. So one of the things that researchers say is that it would seem that we're sort of hardwired and encoded to speak some form of a language. But how it actually came about, they have absolutely no idea, because clearly there aren't going to be fossil evidence of languages. Alright, so their default mode is just to compare us with animals. This is where we have the issue, because fine, they want to compare our language patterns to maybe how animals communicate with each other, but because they believe that we originate from an animal, there's an absence of a soul, you see, complete an utter absence of any type of a soul. Further looking down into how languages develop, so you have to have some kind of development in the frontal cortices of the brain. There we go with the frontal cortices again, you see. And also development in the vocal tract in order for us to be able to make those different sounds, which are distinct from the sounds that an animal would make for food, danger, threat, etc. According to researchers, they think that language developed any time between 100 or 50,000 years ago. Some kind of morphing, evolutionary miracle kind of happened, because they've got no explanation for it. And this is what a lot of people who don't believe in the out of Africa theory have issue with. There is the missing link. We don't see any type of evolution occurring while we are living in the way that they think evolution occurs. At the moment, they seem to think they have some other strange kind of theory out there, simplistic as it is, because they've found a FOXP2 gene, which they're trying to associate it with the language gene, in inverted commas. Again, it's just a simplified explanation of some kind of mutation that happened with the monkey, with the face and the mouth, and with the throat. So again, as I say, the ridiculousness of it doesn't make sense, because they cannot form any sort of a missing link, and they haven't been able to teach any sort of a monkey how to speak. So what actually happened? If we came from monkey to make us to be able to have this amazing capability, which is different from any other species, then of course the complication of language in itself, if you're always fighting for resources and mates, where are you getting the time to form any type of allegiance or group to say that there's going to be enough cohesiveness within the group to be able to form a language that they're able to communicate with each other and understand what those sounds are coming out of each person's mouth actually means? Because to me, you have to have three main things taken care of: food, clothing, and shelter. And that's just on a basic level. Having researched into languages, etc., most researchers would agree with that in order for languages to have developed, there has to have been some sort of cohesiveness within the group in order for them to then start communicating in ways that each other can understand. But if you're always fighting for resources, when are you going to do that? When are you going to have the ability to do that? Because when you look at caveman, all he ever does is, he's on his own as a general rule, has a big old club in his hand, walks up to a random woman, knocks her on the head and drags her off to the cave. So what kind of communication are we having there exactly? So after he's taken off to the cave, he's going to start learning to talk to her then? Doubles down by actually being, and I'm going to say asinine enough to say that an animal and his ability to camouflage itself in the wild is akin to lying. I will try not to laugh in all seriousness, because let's just take a couple of steps back here and look at what Cicella Bock said about lying. Now, she's a prominent thinker. She's a PhD at Harvard University, and she has said lying is so easy compared to other ways of gaining power. So what I would like to know is, at what stage of that animal disguising itself in order to maintain its species? Did it gain power over the animal that was attacking it or wanted to eat it? You know, when he changed colour, did he suddenly whip out his iPhone and look in his bank account and say, "Glad I was able to change colour and hide myself from this predator because I've also got another million in my bank account"? Where does the ability to disguise yourself in such a manner that you can protect your species, so your species can carry on, where is that compared to lying? How can you compare that to lying? Now, this section here is actually called the prankster, and I actually feel that this is the section where they start to play the prank on us, because this is where you see the NLP. So this is where we're going to really start delving into it now. Much of the knowledge we use to navigate the world comes from what others have told us. Without the implicit trust that we place in human communication, we would be paralyzed as individuals and cease to have social relationships. We get so much from believing, and there's relatively little harm when we occasionally get duped, says Tim Levine, a psychologist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, who calls this idea the truth default theory. So here we are back to really just another name for being self-delusional. However, this is quite interesting where he talks about the fact that we use the knowledge that we know is how we use that to navigate the world around us, which is true, because we have, for the most part, all of us that are listening to this particular video, watching this video, will have been to school. The majority of us might have gone on to college or some kind of higher education. Some of us will have been to university, and throughout all those institutions there, what happened? We were told certain information. In fact, we were told we had to learn this information, and in order to succeed or have any kind of status in society, it was important for us to have this knowledge. And in fact, some of us have even gained the knowledge to then go on and be those very people who are in authority, like doctors, nurses, teachers, etc., in society, who basically keep everything going. And yes, indeed, there does have to be a level of trust between us and those people in authority for the system to work. So yes, Tim, totally in agreement with you there. They go on to say being hardwired to be trusting makes us intrinsically gullible. If you say to someone, "I'm a pilot," they're not sitting there thinking, maybe he's not a pilot. Why would he say he's a pilot? We just don't think that way. And that comes from Frank Abagnale Jr. You might remember that they did a movie about him called Catch Me If You Can, because that's how he actually made his living, forging checks and impersonating an airline pilot. So he is now actually, because of what he does, in a position where he's actually consulting people on how to avoid people like him. Robert Fieldman then calls that the liar's advantage, because we're not looking for lies, and a lot of the time we do want to hear what we're hearing, because we don't put up a great deal of resistance when it comes to the comforting lies that we hear, be it false praise or the promise of impossibly high investment. I kind of dealt with that a little bit in the last video where we were talking about the sort of telephone scams and stuff that happened. They further go on to sort of tell us that, which is true, and they were saying we have to, listen to these words because they're talking about authority figures in a way, and how we act or react to them. And they're actually saying that we actually swallow the information that they give us more readily, and when people have wealth and power and status, we take that information that they're giving us as given and as a truth. Researchers have shown that we are especially prone to accepting lies that affirm our worldview. This is when he starts to get really squiffy, and I have to take this apart because it's disgusting. Of the article actually kind of came in three parts, because we have the political aspect, we had the information from the actual research and what the psychologists were saying about their findings, and then also we have the neuro-linguistic aspect of the article. So what I think I'm going to have to do, in order not to make my videos too long, because I know people are busy, people have got more time than to spend hours and hours watching videos on YouTube, so I'm actually going to break this off right now, run through the differences and what we found out when Dr. James Fallon, who actually is a successful individual in his own right, doing research on Alzheimer's, actually found out that his brain was pretty much wired up as a psychopath. However, as I said, he has a successful life and therefore hasn't gone on to commit any crime. And this is where we need to look at things like nature and nurture, which is some of the things that he actually covers in one of his lectures. And I'm actually going to be running through some of the information that I noticed that he was talking about with regards to how mankind is moving forward, and what I thought was sadly missing, even though he had like an epiphany really, because he was never a nurture person. He never thought that environment would affect somebody's personality and how they are actually formed, or as they grow up in, is almost like the resultant of the characteristics that you will have, although some of it obviously is genetic, because actually when Dr. Fallon looked into his family, he just had a whole heap of murderers in there, loads, which is actually quite interesting. And he does talk about the fact that it was that was his Gandalf moment, because obviously that's like the big skeleton that's in the cupboard. When you get to find out that you're studying something, you get to find out that your brain is pretty much wired up like the people that you're studying, and then you start talking to your family and you find out, well, you're not really a nice guy after all. So quite interesting what he says. And as you notice, I gave you a clip from the lip. He does actually have other lectures on YouTube, and I will include a link if you're interested, just to hear what he actually says about the changes he made in his life, what he discovered about himself, and the type of research he's doing now. Because this is all connected with Alzheimer's. This all starts going into sort of gene therapy and what these people have planned for the future. But it's actually really interesting what he says about leaders, the type of personality traits that leaders have, and as we're noticing here, that they tend to have sociopathic, psychopathic, narcissistic, egoistic people. But then he goes on to talk about the fact that perhaps they're the sort of people that actually have the drive. So this is an interesting conversation. As I say, I'm just going to wrap up now with some more information about the brain, what we think about what we found out, and really to find out from you what you think about what we've discovered so far. Alright, so look forward to speaking with you on the next video. We're just going to wrap up from all the information that we just got from, well, not all of the information actually, because we're breaking this information down into 3 sections. We're dealing with the old media mill, because I'm actually challenging the whole tone of the article. I'm leaving a link so that you can actually read it and see it for yourself, see the details that I cover and the details that I miss. Now, most of the details that I'm actually missing are the experiments that they're doing on children. But these are supposed to be supposed experts in their field. They know what they're talking about, so they say. So we're going to just look at this aspect of it, because as I said, there were 3 aspects to the article. The first section really dealt a lot with the experiments that they're doing on children. I'm not covering those, and there's a particular reason. I think most of us are aware of the will they eat the sweetie, won't they eat the sweetie, the brown doll, the pink doll, those types of experiments, which they actually do on our children, turn it around and then show us as entertainment. But how cute is that really? We need to question that, bearing in mind that these results from these experiments, whether they're legitimate experiments or not, there's a very strong possibility that these experiments are actually going to be used for the manipulation of future generations, as I've shown you historically with the experiments that have gone on previously in the past, which is why I'm kind of covering this, because the baby boomer generation were the first to go through this particular type of manipulation and what I call mind control. So what we're actually noticing with the information that we've been given so far is that one question I would ask actually before I move on is, are we being re-traumatized when we watch things like brown doll, pink doll? Are we being re-traumatized when that slavery narrative just keeps on being replayed to us? Bearing in mind that the information that we're finding out about the brain basically tells us that we are a biosuit of electrical impulses and chemicals, and our emotions are chemicals. Alright. Now I'm also questioning this whole out of Africa theory, because what you actually get with that theory actually comes down to social Darwinism. Whether or not people realize it or not, it does. It means that man is soulless. There's either one or two theories and thought on this aspect of social Darwinism. It's either that man has soul until he dies, in which case there's absence of soul, or he has no soul at all and has actually come from animal. He's either animal or machine. Now this particular author, Mr. Bhattacharjee, has so bought into the whole rhetoric that he actually had the audacity to then go on and compare the ability of an animal to disguise itself in the wild for the continuation of its species to lying. So it would seem like we're kind of caught between two clashing cultures, two completely mad scientists. Because when you actually look at the reasons why people lie, they lie for power, they lie for advantage, they lie for wealth, they lie for one-upmanship, they lie because they're lazy, they lie to make excuses. So can someone tell me, when this chameleon is able to disguise himself so he blends in with nature, when these animals are able to not have, being small, not having a lot of defense mechanisms a lot of the times, that is their defense mechanism. That's how they protect the continuation of their species. So can someone tell me, or can Mr. Bhattacharjee tell me, when either of these two animals disguised themselves from a predator that wanted to eat them, which bank rolled its eyes and said, oh my gosh, we've got to pay out this chameleon, we've got to pay out this gecko another few million, because guess what, he just changed colour and disguised himself. When this chameleon changes his colour, does Scotiabank, does it affect their figures? As I said, does he whip out his iPhone and say, woohoo, so happy am I that I was able to change colour, because woo, look at my bank balance, ho ho, I can go and buy some more bananas now. You see, it doesn't make sense. This type of comparison is puerile and really doesn't make sense. Now, and then you see, this is, they then want to go on to sort of say that we started lying as soon as we learned a language. But in fact, when you do proper research, what you'll find out is that they really don't know. They don't know. You've got one school of thought, and I'm more inclined to be in agreement with that school of thought, like say Godfrey Higgins, who talks about there was some kind of an accounting and counting going on, and that would have developed the language. But you've got a cohesive group of people. Then you've got Paleo Hebrew, where they talk about it's very similar to baby talk. That was possibly an original language, but nobody knows. And again, like the missing link between man and ape, they've come up with some theory about a FOXP2 gene that mutated a monkey's face, mouth and throat region in order for them to be able to speak. Well, this just sounds like another Piltdown man, because there's a great bit of difference between the sounds that we make that vocalizes words than the sounds that animals make when they vocalize their communication. And that's the sad thing. They're not looking at our ability to communicate. It's such a wide and varied language. I mean, languages are complex without even looking at the variations of language. Just speaking a language in itself is a complex task. It's an art. It's a science. You have syntaxes, grammatical structures, all types of things going on there. So bearing in mind, it stands to reason that there has to be cohesiveness and a certain amount of peace and harmony that's going on between a people group to be able to develop the discipline necessary for effective communication. It's one of the primary actions that we have that separates us from animals. And as far as the brain is concerned, their research is telling us basically, as I said, we're a biosuit of electrical impulses. We're motivated by our emotions, which at the end of the day are just chemicals. So it's important, the language that we not only hear, but the language we speak to ourselves, that language that goes on in our head, because that is also essential for both our mental and our physical health. We see from the beginning of the research that DiPaolo, 2 generations ago, was really talking about our lives are basically altruistic ones in nature, because as we saw from the Psychology Today article, those lies are actually the lubricant that keeps society going. But now, when we read the National Geographic, what we're actually witnessing is a general consensus that maybe lying isn't such a bad quality, it isn't such a bad thing, because as they're doing the brain scans, they're noticing that a lot of the people who are in leadership positions actually have these psychopathic brain connections. Their brains are connected up that way. And this is the thing. You see, they're not talking to us about the frontal cortices, those areas of the brain that have absolutely and utterly everything to do with who we are, how we self-identify. So what do you think happens to us when we take advice from these people or these so-called experts who start telling us that maybe it's a good idea to build a life on self-delusion? Because actually, when you look at a psychopath's brain, they have no empathy. They have no emotional empathy. So they're not even aware that they're being rude and uncaring and actually saying disgusting things and behaving in disgusting ways. Because why? Their brains are actually wired up differently. Now, the interesting thing, as I talked about James Fallon, was the fact that he did talk about nature and nurture, because he came up from a family, and I'm not slandering the gentleman, he has a very successful life. He's doing research into Alzheimer's and how to cure Alzheimer's, but he himself has admitted on through national media that when he did his brain scan, yes, he had psychopathic tendencies and came from genetically a family of murderers. However, he did start talking about the nature-nurture. But let's see what direction they decide to go in, because unfortunately it's not the side of looking at how to nurture these communities who have suffered abandonment and huge amounts of violence historically in the past. You see, there's no cure for that. What they want to start doing is going into the brain and start tampering with the brain. So as far as I'm concerned, you see a lot of people who are there just trying to justify themselves, their industries, and their lives. Because a lot of this, as I said previously, is false evidence appearing real. Who in their right mind would tell somebody that it's a good idea to be self-delusional? And who in their right minds is going to encourage children to lie? But this is what we're seeing, and this is what we're going to be doing in our next video, is really going down into what is going on in the brain of a psychopath. What type of feelings do they have, if any? Alright, so as I said, I am going to leave some links down below so you can check out Dr. James Fallon. Also, I'm going to be leaving links so you can go and check out the the National Geographic article, so that you can read up at any time. But I'd really like to know what your thoughts are, because do you think that it's more worthy to have a healthy knowledge of self, like knowing who your ancestors are and where they came from? Or do you think that it's more healthy to live a life of self-delusion? Let me know what you think.